Everything's fine. Yeah.
That's,
How are you?
That's our mantra.
I know, right? It'll be fine.
Right. I love your hair. I just love it. I think it looks amazing.
Thank you. You know, we've had heat indices of like 107 to 120, so it feels right.
This weekend we opened the Renaissance Fair, so I run the Arms and Armor booth at the Renaissance Fair, and it was actually really nice. Like the weather was in the 70s. It was a little hot. It was a little hot when the sun was out, but if you were in the sun, if you were in the booth, it was fine. But it won't stay that way. It'll get to be terrible.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it always does, right? It's fair season. I worked a lot of fairs back in my day. I know.
Yeah. Yeah. But you did it out in the sun, right? And like
often
physically exerting yourself.
Yeah. Well, definitely that.
Right.
I mean, I gotta be real. Like, I'm not sure which I hated more, like the 100-degree days or like the 60-degree and rainy days.
Sure.
Those
well,
also
again,
sucked.
Yeah. So again, for me, like being in a shop all day, and we have a really great shop because it's not, so it's completely open, right? So like, yeah. So so we get a lot of fresh air, and we're basically outside, but we're just sheltered. But it's a big enough space where it doesn't feel like you're kind of sheltered. It's like you're legit in a building. It's just everything's open. So it's really, really nice for, unfortunately it's also a magnet when it starts pouring for like everyone coming in, which you would think is like a great thing, right? But it's like it gets chaotic.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure it's not people looking to buy. It's just people looking.
Yeah, I mean, every once in a while, and we also like to give. So one of the fun parts of the job is that we just get to talk to people about swords all the time. So our chops on like the use of and the types of historical arms, mostly arms. We don't really deal with any armor, even though we're called arms and armor. But like our chops on the use of a variety of weapons are like through the roof. Like we're so good at communicating fundamental information about various ways that swords evolve or the types of swords that people use in the regions and the geography that they use them, the cultural context in which they use them. We like know all that stuff so pat. It's great. And then like if you don't like, because we'll get new stuff at the shop and it's like, well, what is this? So it's like, well, you have to go do your research now because you have to talk about it. So we just like, we're always grabbing new customers and then giving them a 45-minute lecture on stuff. And sometimes that helps people buy. Actually, I'm not sure it does. I think they probably end up getting sucked into the narrative and then not end up buying. It's a way to pass the time. I don't know.
Oh,
anyway,
for sure. What's your favorite misconception? Or no, a better question, because favorite is a shitty question.
Yeah.
How have the misconceptions shifted over the years you've worked?
That's a much better question. That is a much better question because it's totally like memey and like a little cringy, honestly, to joke about misconceptions about swords. Like not everybody knows everything. Like just fucking
and they shouldn't. No.
right. And yeah, there are some misconceptions out there. But honestly, they're not as bad as, like, I've been working there for 7 years now. I've been working at Arms.
Okay.
And
so that brings you, no, not quite pre-Game of Thrones, because I wondered if Game of Thrones would be an influence on what people thought about swords.
Yeah, so Game of Thrones and Vikings would be the two biggest cultural phenomena that influenced the way. And Forged in Fire. Game of Thrones, Vikings, and Forged in Fire, and then to a lesser extent, Men at Arms Reforged, which is a YouTube web series that was on. I don't know if they're still doing it, but they do like video game swords. It's Carrie from Baltimore Knife and Sword.
Yeah,
Do you know
I think I've seen that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's actually it's
Well,
an
I definitely
excellent.
know Baltimore, yeah, but
Yeah, right,
yeah.
right. It's an excellent show. I actually kind of prefer it to Forged in Fire, although Forged in Fire is fine too. They're both good. Um, but Men at Arms Reforged, even though the stuff that they make on the show is completely ridiculous and totally not viable at all for the most part, right? Like every once in a while they'll make something that, because it's like fantasy swords or video game swords, and so like the whole thing is you have to um, the what people draw in cartoons
Yeah.
vis-a-vis weapons, right? Like those are not functional weapons at all.
Right.
But yeah, so I think so one thing that remains is the conception of the the average weight of a sword, right?
Sure.
And I think most of it is that people just have no sense of what things weigh, right? So like they
Right.
just, and it's fine. Like again, like, but if you would have said, okay, well, hold on, how much does a gallon of milk weigh, right? Like that's
Yeah.
something that we all learn in school, right? Like we learned that a gallon of milk weighs 8 pounds, right? And
Right.
so like, does this feel as heavy as a gallon of milk? Because you'll put it in their hand. So you'll say like, okay, how much do you think this weighs? And they're like 20 pounds. You're like, okay. And they put it in their hand, and then they're like, okay, it's not 20, it's 15. It's like, hold
Right.
on, do you think that weighs twice as much as a gallon of milk because it's 3 pounds? It's right.
Right.
So that would be the thing that the general audience is least equipped to deal with, or has developed a false sense of reality around, for the most part. And otherwise actually the information out there has gotten pretty good. So even like
Oh,
quote
good.
unquote even like quote unquote normies are watching a lot of YouTube, that so like maybe they're not like religious fanatics, but they like watch Scala Gladiatoria and Scala Grim, and like the
Yeah.
shows that do a really decent job of getting the right kind of information out there,
Yeah.
or at least the information that like we would agree that is viable, right?
Yeah.
Like so
Oh, that's
getting
awesome
kind of,
though.
yeah, it's totally cool, and it's cool to be able to like, because we'll get customers and they'll be like, oh, blah blah blah, I saw the blah blah blah. The communities or the world has gotten so flat, right? To use Thomas Friedman's analogy, the world has gotten
Yeah.
so flat that a lot of times people will be bringing stuff up and will have direct like 1 degree of separation or no degrees of separation, like they're just friends, right? People who host YouTube channels or whatever, like so yeah, it's pretty good. Most people kind of get it right, and I think that is, um, I think that YouTube has helped. So like in the course of the last 7 years,
Yeah.
YouTube and Facebook, and just like, I don't know, it's easier to get kind of heady uh, and it's easier to have access to the kind of niche discussion that's happening in various little pocket communities. Um,
Right. And pocket communities that are more historically focused rather than potentially, fantasy or art or
right,
the other pocket communities that love swords, right?
right. Well, yeah, and so there's so much overlap too, right? Because people
Yeah.
can only like get into fantasy swords for so long before they start looking at other things. Actually, so this is, and I know that we have an agenda today. We'll see how well we stick to it. But
We won't.
I spent uh, last weekend, uh, or 2 weekends ago, in Baltimore, and I got to hang out with our friends Ben and Travis
Yeah.
and a bunch of those other guys, and we were talking about community and how we identify as part of a community, and then how being on YouTube, like watching the discussion that are happening between various YouTube channels, right? Um,
Okay. Yeah.
that is sort of it's easier for people to begin to self-identify as being a part of a community.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So like it used to be when it was cable where you're so far removed from the thing that you were watching that you were really invested in that it didn't necessarily mean that you started to identify with it culturally, right?
Yeah.
But now that everything has gotten so close, like you can interact on Twitter with these people and often interact, like actually you
Do.
send a tweet and they'll send a tweet back, right? Or in the YouTube comments. And even if you don't, just watching the conversation makes you feel like you're there, right? So if you watch it, it's not good enough to watch one channel, but if you begin to watch kind of the other channels and the discussion and the dialogue that are happening between
Yeah.
various ones, now all of a sudden, like you feel invested, you feel a part of it, and then you begin to self-identify. And we've talked before about self-identifying with a cultural group, right? Is like, that's fundamental to our humanity, right?
Yeah.
And we begin to adopt, and this is where we begin to adopt values and perspectives and allow people to influence our way of thinking, etc. And so we spent it was funny that we're talking about this in terms of arms and armor, because that's another it's exemplar of this phenomena again, right? So people are integrating themselves into these communities even though they don't have any exposure, or they're not like directly in contact with the sort of the thought leaders or whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Anyway, sorry. So that's my
Well,
Renaissance
no.
sorry.
Yeah, no,
Go
that's
ahead.
great. And I think that I actually find that a fantastic segue to our presumed topic of the day.
Yeah.
Which is, fashion, or how I feel about fashion.
Right. And I love
Because
I want you to put that in the description, how Jesse feels about fashion. Right?
that's what we're talking about.
Because that's
right?
what we're doing. I have
Sorry.
I have things, but meh. Right?
No, I think you'll be into it. Have we talked about fashion? Have I told you about it?
Well, so yeah, we've spent a lot of time talking about we have spent a lot of time talking about fashion. A lot.
Okay. But with regards to YouTube versus cable, and why does this work? And it's because it's selling us the fantasy that we are these people's friends. I have never once endured a fantasy where me and Nicole Kidman are friends.
Right. Or like Charlie Rose. We'll like give you a little bit more credit than Nicole Kidman.
Okay, cool. It doesn't matter.
Sure.
But yeah, right? Or Tom Brokaw, right? Like Tom Brokaw and I are not friends. Is he a familiar face? Would I hear his voice and know exactly who it is? Like all of this stuff? Yes. But what now happens is what people are calling parasocial relationships, which is your perceived relationship with a content creator online. You think you're their friend because you comment to them and maybe they comment back.
Right. I think that the language is misleading. I think that I would augment the language, that I wouldn't regard it as a fantasy. Right. Now maybe it's a little, so like I mean it's certainly not reflective of reality, or at least it's probably not the best. Whatever way we think about it is probably not the best way to think about it, and we should probably evolve into. But I think it's different than a fantasy, right? Because it's not like there is something there. I think. Would you agree with that, or how would you?
I think it's more complex than that.
Okay.
I think it's more complex than that because, I mean, an example, the first swordfish I went to, and I've told you this story before, but somebody I didn't know, I had no idea who they were, what at all. They were a fencer of some kind. from somewhere in Europe
Mm-hmm.
came up to me and asked me how my child was doing. Because I had mentioned on social that my child was sick and used my child's first name.
Sure.
I had no idea who this human was.
Right.
Right? So that's what I'm talking, like, as a person who puts stuff out there, it's a fantasy that you have a relationship with that person.
Sure.
Right? Because, and there are some real relationships, and don't get me wrong, right? And like, I try to know everyone I'm reacting to. See, there we go. I try to know everybody I am, right? Reacting to online.
It's become the language. Like, that's, yeah.
Yeah, it's gross. But, you know, so it is, it's super gross.
Right.
I try to be real, right? But there is a real actual human limit to how many people you can keep in your brain.
Yeah.
And maybe my limit is lower because my brain is broke. So I think parasocial is real. I think
sure. I mean, I don't think that. Yeah, I would just say I would hesitate to call it a complete fantasy because there is something there is a degree of interaction that does happen.
Yes.
Right. And so maybe, right. So does that make, so like, I'm okay with parasocial. But I feel like to say that it's like, I don't know. I mean, it's definitely hard to understand the truth of it. Like the nature of your relationship. So it's maybe there is a real relationship that's happening. And it can develop too over time. So like, for instance, if we get the same person commenting on a video or the same the same person reacting all the time, eventually we get to say like, oh, there's that person, right? Like that's an actual human that that we've seen kind of over and over and over and has established a relationship with us. And like now we know them in the context of that relationship. And we have an expectation that they've, and also that's another thing too, is that we have an expectation that they've been a part of the conversation. So for instance, there are podcasts that I've listened to where I've listened to like every podcast over the course of several, like 1,000 even. Right. Yeah. And then I'll see the person. In fact, I'll give you an example. So someone asked a question about what someone said on the podcast. Now they had been on the podcast 3 to 4 times over the course of several thousand. And someone asked a question, actually didn't ask a question about what they said, asked the host on social media to ask the guest next time some question. And I was like, oh no, he said that on the, he addressed that in the first episode, and then he addressed a different part of your question in the second time that he was on the podcast. Right. And I just knew that mostly because I loved the guest and I committed those episodes to my memory. But like the host then like was like, it's like, it makes me laugh that you know all of that. Right. That's what they responded to me. But suffice to say, we became friends. So now I'm actually friends with the host of that podcast. And it probably has to do with the fact that I demonstrated that, that I listen. Right. And so now that host kind of treats me as though I've been a part of all of the conversations that he's had over the course of several thousand episodes. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. And I mean, I'm not to say that real relationships can't develop. Because certainly I have completely made friendships based entirely off of somebody started following my sword shit, right?
Yeah.
And then commented, and then I commented, and then we get commenting, and then I'm like, let's take it to DM, and then we're right. That totally happens.
Sorry. So go ahead.
But I know, for instance, okay, an example like, Todd Workshop, right? That YouTube channel, which I watch most everything he puts out. And he's doing some really cool experimentation right now, though probably already has done, and we're just waiting for the videos to come out. But but when in the spin up to that, as a part of that, fabric armor was a deal. So in the comments, someone I don't know was like, "Hey Todd, tagged me. You should have Jess doing your fabric armor stuff because she knows her shit."
Mm-hmm.
And then Todd's like, "Cool, like hook us up." And so then I sent some emails, and then it never went anywhere for like who knows why. But but like again, like that's an example of someone who follows both of us enough to know both of our own stuff, trying to hook us up.
Right.
And then
right.
and then it didn't go anywhere, and that's okay,
Sure.
But that's not to say that is a conversation and a community. Well, I guess that, all right. I'm talking myself into your position is what's happening. I'll just keep talking until I agree with you.
Right. Well, here's the bottom line. The bottom line is it's super complex.
I lost your
audio.
audio.
No. Was it me? Oh no. I'm still.
Oh, there you are. You're back.
Okay. All right. So here's my final thought, and I'm happy to leave it here. Is it's super complex. We have no idea. We have no idea how to freaking deal with it. Like we don't know how to engage with the world the way it is, and over time, I think it's going to evolve into something that's a little bit more clear, and probably radically different than every way that we've sort of engaged.
That we've tried to do it.
Before.
Yeah.
But what I would say, and this is the thought that began this in Baltimore, which is that the idea, because we've been talking about community, and what is community? We've been trying to get to the root of it, and what I noticed is that because we've talked about, I've been getting into fighting games, right? Just as a hobby, because whatever, right? Like I need a way to decompress from all of the other stuff that I'm doing and all the other communities that I'm in. I was watching some videos, and I began with just watching like helpful tips and tricks, tutorial videos to get better. And then I began watching stuff on the history of the development of fighting games. And it's like, okay, why did I do that? Because I was driving 14 hours to Baltimore and I needed mindless content to assist me, right? You can only read so many audiobooks or hear so many audiobooks before you're like, all right, my brain is saturated. So, but then I realized that I was starting to watch just other content that was tangentially associated with fighting games or whatever, or like maybe not dealing with history, but it's sort of just a conversation about where they are or where they were or where they're going and what they're doing, what are some cool things about it. And then all of a sudden I realized like, oh my God, I'm starting to like buy into this freaking thing. Right. Yeah. And also, by the way, they have a name. They're the fighting game community, the FGC. And if you look up like fighting games, you will immediately see like the first 10 results, like 7 of them will have FGC in the title, right? So like people are conceiving themselves as these online communities. That's just a reality, right? Like that's how they're identifying, and they have their whole history, right? Because because you need a history because it's a narrative. It's all about a story that we're telling ourselves and all about our place in the story. Right.
There you go.
And so my question was, how many videos do I need to consume before I'm like I'm in the fighting game community? Right. Do I have to go to like a convention, or can I just like have watched a bunch of this stuff and then I can have a conversation with other people who have too? I don't know. That's sort of what got me started on this. And I, whenever I saw like, okay, the fighting game community, FGC over and over, I was like, okay, this is bigger than like HEMA, right? And bigger than our conversation about what the community is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's legit. That's legit.
And you've been dealing with the same thing with rock climbing.
Oh my God. Yes.
Right?
Oh, it's so freaking like there's only one art, baby. There is nothing new under this sun.
Yeah.
It's so funny, like watching those videos and like okay, so for a HEMA community like trash mean video for the lulz, right? Like you might have somebody dressing up like a tournament fighter and then dressing up like a Ren Fair fighter and then dressing up like a, you know, whatever, right? And there'd be like these series of like for and the humor is in the contrast, right? But there's literally climbing videos of that exact same meme, like about styles of climbing.
Mm-hmm.
It's
and so
identical.
What are the styles?
Oh God, I don't even know, right? But well, there was the one I saw yesterday was talking about like, I don't remember the exact terms, right? So if you're in the climbing community, sorry, I'm new, but it's but it like somebody that climbs all nice and smooth, like just chill and like, you know,
like a lizard,
looking like, yeah, like they're creeping up the wall, versus somebody who's like, you know, leaping, you know, from place to place and their legs are flying out and they're like, you know, their whole body goes sideways, right? And just kind of giggling about that. And like I'm sure there are arguments about which is better, but like as far as I'm concerned, it's just fashion. Boom. Right?
Okay, so that is excellent, right? Because fashion, what you're insinuating there is that fashion is, and you know, sort of expression of your culture, of your cultural values, of your cultural norms that exist beyond sort of like your apparel, right? Beyond the clothing that you wear. Right?
Yes.
It's an attitude, it's everything, right? So tell me more about that.
Fashion is the story you tell yourself for the purpose of telling it to other people. That is what fashion is. And so there's a million ways you can do that. You know, obviously, you know, most of us think of fashion as the clothes we put on and whether they are in fashion or out of fashion. And I think that's a very boring and not particularly useful idea of the concept.
Right.
And so what got me turned back onto this was our friend Adam Franti has a fantastic podcast. We'll link it, called Murder Hobos, which he has just started with Tony. Tony's last name has left me.
I can't remember it either because I think that he like doesn't have his last name on his Facebook, and that's all. That's the only thing that. Like.
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Tony and Adam are doing this podcast called Murder Hobos, and it's fantastic. And definitely have a listen. But they were talking. The most recent episode was about the Duel of the Mignons, which were highly fashionable young men in their time and place.
I was wrong. It's Tony Williams. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you for grabbing that. Tony Williams. And so the Mignons were like noted for the fact that they were super dressed up, super flamboyant, over the top, maybe queer, right? Like all sorts of other things get dragged into that, which is beyond our conversation. But Tony asked Adam in their Q&A episode if Adam knew when it happened that men became less interested, or when culturally it became such that men did not want to be fashionable. And I disagree with that take, because the fashion is to appear as though one does not care.
Oh, I don't even know if that's right, but I definitely agree with your sentiment, but I think we can get it a little closer, which is that,
sure.
Because I don't think that people, I think that they would be happy to appear that they that they care, but it's just they care maybe about being a little bit more discreet, right? Or a little bit more, a little bit less, I don't know. Does that make sense?
Okay, but again, I'm just gonna keep pushing at this masculinity thing here, because this is modern American masculinity, right? The story is that you are choosing comfort and function.
So
but I think presentation, right?
But I think so. If someone actively chose presentation, right, then they would be, or at least there are ways in which our modern sense of masculinity, or people who have a sort of more conservative, and by conservative I don't, so it's all this terminology sucks, right?
Yeah.
But like, they would look at that, or some people would look at that and say, well, that's too much, right? The person is trying too hard. So I think that there's a sense in which it's like, if you appear that you're going too far. So it's not just like, I don't deal with that because it's all I just throw whatever I have on, right? It's like, no, doing that is wrong, right? Like there's something about going too far with your fashion choices, with what you wear, that it's like you're presenting too much, you're coming across too strongly. So it's like an appeal to discretion. Or does that make sense?
Yes.
I think, and you're probably wondering, how is that different? Maybe it's not different. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't. I just,
right, because I could put you in a t-shirt and cargo shorts, and make the t-shirt pink and the cargo shorts purple. Yeah. And you would say no. No, well, maybe not you, but one probably would say no.
I probably would say no. I probably would say no. It's funny though. My kids would not. It's correct. It's great. Yeah. So that's a thing that's happening for sure. Like people are wearing jorts and they're pink and they're wearing like whatever, and it's, and the thing is, I wouldn't say no because it like indicates or signifies something about my personality or my culture. I would say no because there's just something uncomfortable about it, right?
Oh, hold on.
That's so great. That's amazing.
Hello? You're back. Okay, good.
That was amazing. The audio was great.
Oh, did it come through?
It totally came through. I love your ringtone.
My phone.
It's great.
Oh my God. Great. Hold on, everybody. I had no idea that the ringtone would even come through. That's crazy. Okay, I have disconnected my phone. That won't happen again. Sorry, everybody. We're professionals.
Okay, so wait. So
you said it would not signify anything about you, but
I wouldn't reject it because of what it signified about me. Like I wouldn't say to myself like, I can't put on that because it tells the world XYZ story, right?
Okay.
I would reject it because it made me feel uncomfortable in a way that I can't articulate.
Right. And I think the articulation is useful.
For sure. I mean, understanding it in a deeper way.
Would you be uncomfortable in a dressing room by yourself, looking at yourself? Or would you only be uncomfortable when you step out?
I don't know.
I mean, I don't know either.
Right. Yeah.
Right? These things are weird. So this is fashion to me. Like, this is what's interesting.
That's exactly. Yes, for sure. And it's all fashion. Fashion is a fundamental aspect of our humanity.
Right. Right. And so the idea that modern American men don't care about fashion because cargo shorts and t-shirts have been the thing for 20 years. Like, anyways, I don't think that means men don't care about fashion. I think that means they care very fucking deeply that they have clung so hard to the t-shirt and cargo short, right? I think that's interesting.
Like, it's also it's worth saying that is going the way of the dodo. And I think it has to do it again. But I think it's the same thing. I think it can all be tied to mass media and corporate media and the democratization of media through social media platforms like YouTube and such, where people are finding their communities and they're identifying and they're allowing themselves to be influenced by. And that's okay, we've talked about this before, I believe. When I went to school, you belonged to certain groups based on the type of music that you listen to, the type of clothes that you wear.
Yeah.
Right. That was it. That was how that was who your communities were and how you expressed yourself to the rest of the school. There were some people that were more neutral, right? I would have been kind of closer to that group. That was also true for my wife, who had a totally different experience. She went to a different high school. She came from a different town, right? So like, this is what I'm describing, I feel is like represents a large swath of the U.S., right? Was it true for you?
I definitely was not neutral, but yeah, I think.
Well, I'm sorry. Was it? Yeah, no. Was it true for you that this is the way that the school was segmented?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I slotted strongly into the hippies.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was the 90s.
I mean, that was definitely. There weren't as many of them when I was going to school.
I'm a little older than you.
Just a hair, but they were there, and I definitely gravitated. Those were like my core group of friends, like my 4 or 5 like really, really strong friends, definitely were in that crowd. For sure. But then so there were people, and the people who listened to rap, the people who listened to metal, the people who listened to punk, and then you had like the chorus kids. So then you also had people segmented based on activity that they were involved in.
And there would be overlap, and people would kind of smush around depending on what classes you were taking that semester and stuff. But yeah, for sure. I completely agree. Like, there were one could say, your manner of dress signified in one way what crew you wanted to be associated with. And then your artistic, musical tastes and your activity tastes could expand that circle a little bit beyond, whoever you would tend to gravitate to, depending on, I think this is true, depending on how hard you went with your fashion. Because if you went hard, like goths were just kind of showing up when I was in high school. They were a little bit after me. But if you were a hardcore goth kid,
right, you really didn't have anyone. You couldn't. It would have been very hard for you to find yourself waiting for the bus, not hanging out with the goth kids, right? Like if you were like, you had all of the piercings and you had the hair and it was coming all, and you got everything was black and you had studded everything, and that's where your pants were like
this big.
Then that was the group that you were involved in.
Right. And like, it wouldn't matter if you were great at basketball. You wouldn't be hanging out with any of those kids.
Right.
You might not even get let on the team.
For sure.
Even if you were good. So
that is really, really interesting.
It's true.
Because you have to expect that like at least some of those people were good athletes, right? Like, there's no law that says that you can't be a good athlete if you identify with people who put so much product in their hair that you can't actually see follicles. Right? But you don't see them on the team, right? Those people aren't on the team. That's really wild.
And so, to tie this back to physical arts, I often think about the fashion of movement, right? Because I see that in fencers, right? And like I said about the climbers, like this has nothing to do with your ability to do the sport necessarily, but it has to do with you signifying to those watching, as well as to yourself, what kind of person you are when you do this activity, right? So like if you roll up and you mean mug and you walk out with your shoulders like this, I have a certain thought about you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's, you know, it's neither here nor there, but it tells me whether or not I think I'd enjoy a beer after the fencing with you.
Right? I mean, for sure.
You know?
I mean, is it, so it's neither here nor there. Actually, it probably is kind of here and there, right?
Yeah.
Is the point.
It
right?
matters.
It really does matter. And I think
But
it matters
people,
to them too.
oh
Right?
yeah.
So like they know what they're doing, and they know, at least in a subconscious way, they know what they're doing, and they know who they're calling out to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, like does it matter to our interpretation of sources if our fashion of movement is specific to a modern sport or not? I don't know. This is something that keeps me up at night, though.
Right. Well, I mean, there's no, if someone decides that what is important about studying the sources, what's important about their engagement with the HEMA project, the way that I kind of describe it,
Yeah.
is to spend a lot of time tracing through iconography patterns of movement, right? So like trying to really hone in on that particular aspect of recreation,
Yeah.
right? Well then that's a valid way to engage with the HEMA project, but there's no reason why that has to be everybody's focus if their practice is their own, and other people might learn other things, right? So like from a HEMA perspective, we can't all do everything, right? We're just human.
No.
And so some people will make one thing their focus, and other people make other things their focus. But I do think it's interesting to think about how those choices are reflective of other attitudes, right? And and the direction those choices take us, both in terms of what we learn and in terms of the people that we begin to conceive of as part of our broader community.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that is absolutely so, you know. And I think, not even I think, I absolutely know I have witnessed trends in movement fashion in HEMA.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And also, by the way, in MMA, in fucking judo, right? Like you see one person will go dominate one year, and then all of a sudden everybody's trying to walk into the ring like them. Like the walking into the ring is the thing that brought that person success, right? Of course it didn't. But that's what we do.
Right.
Right?
Right. So yeah, so there's a way in which we view the relevant dimension of success on the part of the people that we're trying to emulate as sort of the basis for, we view those aspects that we're trying to emulate as the basis for their success.
Yes.
Right. Even though, and then there are ways in which it may be true, and then there are ways in which it's definitely probably not true, right? But it's so hard to parse out. And that's not the way that humans are designed, almost, right? Like we're not designed to parse out the relevant aspect of someone's performance as the thing that we would attempt to model to help our success.
Yeah.
Right. we're designed to see the thing and like, and then start to emulate holistically.
Yes. And yeah, I think you're absolutely there. And we are not great at figuring out what are the relevant pieces. Yeah. So we pick up on the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
And try to do that. You know, it's like watching a kid learn a physical skill, right?
Right.
Like they will do hilariously gigantic movements, like the first time you hand a little guy a hammer, right?
Right.
Like, you know, it'll be
right.
And like no adult around them ever hammered like that.
Right.
But they, you know, they don't quite get it yet, right?
And also, and so like that's another thing too. So there's this really important piece, which is that we begin by saying, okay, I have this picture in my head of what I want to achieve, right?
Yeah.
And so then I say, all right, let me look for people who model success in that particular dimension, right? And then I can't parse out the aspects of their practice that will lead me to success in that particular dimension. And so I begin to emulate their practice in bigger ways.
Mm-hmm.
And then slowly my sense of what I'm looking to achieve begins to change.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think you have something there. And it's curious to see those kind of trends come through.
Right. Especially, because it's not just me, right? This is a network, right?
Yeah.
And so we're all engaged in this process. And as new people come in and out and things change, like it's so,
Right. Exactly. And you know, and then again, you know, to keep it topical to fashion or how this is fashion, you know, you can also see trends in what sportsmen or sports people wear based on who had success.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's absurd, magical thinking that, I don't know, I've noticed a trend in a lot of male spaces, but like now everyone can wear compression garments, right? Everyone can wear super tight pants.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started HEMA, everyone that wore super tight pants got called derogatory terms referencing their masculinity, right?
Right.
But somebody, I don't know exactly who it was, but somebody in MMA had some success wearing tight pants.
I mean, yeah.
I don't know who did it first. I know who I can kind of picture, but it's probably not right because I don't follow MMA that close.
Right. So I was thinking in basketball, everyone's got these bright pink color shoes, right? Like that's become a thing. And I think that's just a smaller version of this thing, right? So like, my oldest son, who's, you know, he's an adult male. He works at a moving company. He power lifts competitively, right? He wears pink jorts, right? He's like a giant man. He wears pink jorts, right? Like and like he doesn't feel any of the shame or any of the cultural pressure that I would have felt when I was his age, wearing clothes like that, even as like physically competent as he is or as I was, right? Like, that would have been very, very uncomfortable for me, and he just doesn't have those cultural pressures. And I think that there's a lot of reasons for that. I think that we need to do take 2 on this. We're running up on time here today because we have to cut the pod early. But I think next time that we get together, which who knows when that'll be for various reasons, but we'll that's not this Monday, because next, this Monday we're doing
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Horsey Hema. But the next time we should revisit this, because there's lots more, I think, that's worth saying.
I think so. All right, let's do that.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. I'll talk to you soon.
All right.